Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Window on the West. I am here with my friends Michael Grumbine and Dan Coates right over there. And we are in 3 different time zones, but yet we still get together every week to talk Tolkien. And it's a good thing. Because what can be better? Maybe reading Chesterton at times together and smoking a cigar. But hey, if we can't do that corporately right now, we'll take this. So anyway. anyway, good to see you guys. It's been a week.
Hey, good to see you too, man.
Nice,
good to see you guys.
Nice to have you all back. Today, as we get started, we're going to get into the second half of the Return of the Noldor. Well, second or the last third of it, I guess. So go through all those interesting changes in there, or not changes so much as where everybody goes and where everybody's settling and how long it takes. Kind of a lot going on in a short chapter, but I think we've come to accept that in the Silmarillion, that a lot goes on in these short chapters sometimes, or these short parts. There's like, hey, there's 500 years gone all of a sudden.
Yeah, he's shifting. Tolkien's shifting now to do more of a historical narrative. So we jump a bunch of years for him to give us a sort of outline. And he's going to dig back in on certain details.
Before we jump into all that, though, we have...
All that is gold does not glitter.
And this week, I'm sorry for you audio-only listeners. We're doing something that's a little more visual. So if you want to check this out, check it out on YouTube. We're also on Rumble now, so you can go to Rumble. I think it's just rumble.com/theoneringcom, like all one word, like the URL, but all one word. So you could do that. Or I'll put links below for these things that we're going to be looking at and discussing. But first, here's a little teaser of what we're going to be talking about. Earlier this week, I had some fun with Rings of Power quotes and artificial intelligence, meaning how art is generated artificially by phrases that you can put in. And so I put in these phrases from the Rings of Power for fun to see what it would generate. And I played with it a little bit more, and I kind of threw in some styles, and like you can say in the style of John Howe, and I've gotten a little bit more proficient in how to do these things. But what you see on the screen here is the quote, "A dog may bark at the moon, but he cannot bring it down." And that was a kind of cool one. Like it's a moon with clouds, very stylistic. There's almost like rounded rocks that this dog in a distance, the silhouette of a dog, is sitting on.
Yeah, it's almost like the moon. The clouds are transforming into the rocks that he's sitting on.
What's funny is the AI generated art is far better than the phrase itself. Come up there. So that was one we came up with.
Maybe that's how they wrote Rings of Power. They just had AI generate everything.
That's right. I would not be surprised. Here's the second one.
Oh boy!
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because a stone sees only downward. And it's a picture of like a Pixar style sailboat above a Pixar style rock. So you can check that out. This is all on my Twitter profile.
Big googly eyes.
With big googly eyes, yeah. And I admit on this one, I did tell it to do it in Pixar style, which is what it came up with. And I thought, this is pretty awesome. This looked great. It made me laugh really hard when
we're all going to be replaced by AI.
And then the last one here.
What is going on there?
I have no idea. This is the phrase, "Give me the meat and give it to me raw." And it's like 2 guys and what looks like, like a cheap Italian restaurant. One guy without a shirt. Something is super weird with his chest. I have no idea what's going on.
It's the raw meat.
There's raw meat behind it, but what really freaked me out is these crazy heads it's stuck behind them in the upper right. I have no idea what they're doing with that. That was absolutely crazy. So in the spirit of generating things with artificial intelligence and art, and I'm using Midjourney in case anybody wants to try this out. It's midjourney.com. And because I'm having so much fun, I paid for the subscription because it was pretty awesome. So I'm going to show you, here's the thing. I'm going to show you
that's quite the
a few different images from relatively very well-known quotes from The Lord of the Rings that this thing generated. So I want you to guess what they are, and we'll see if you can guess the phrase. Dan, you should get most of these. Maybe there's one that's a little bit harder from The Lord of the Rings.
These are all Tolkien from The Lord of the Rings?
These are all Tolkien from The Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
What I did is I took the exact phrase and I put it up and I wanted to see what it would generate with the exact phrase. So this is the first image. Can you guess what the phrase is? If one of you wants to maybe describe the image, feel free to.
The image looks like a version of the One Ring sitting on a some kind of parchment with lettering behind it, and there's script inside and outside the ring glowing. So it's a gold ring. Now it's not quite as simple as the One Ring is portrayed, but it's clearly like the One Ring, and it's got fiery letters.
Yeah.
Inside and out.
So Dan, do you want to guess what this phrase is that I used to generate this image? Or Michael, one of you guys can jump in. They're not hidden. They're phrases that are made popular by the film, probably, or by the movie itself, or that people would tattoo on themselves.
I mean, is go ahead, Dan. Yeah.
I would probably guess just one ring to rule them all.
That's it. Yep. One ring to rule them all. Yeah.
All right.
I did the whole phrase. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. And it generated this.
Now, what's interesting about that? I mean, look, this is clearly a contest of can you think like an AI is what we're doing here. So
how robotic are you?
How artificial are we? So the answer is we're quite artificial apparently. But what's interesting to me is that there's nothing inherent in that phrase, because I was thinking about that. That was the first phrase that came to mind. Nothing inherent in that phrase, though, that would come up with these flowing, fiery letter scripts on a gold ring, which means that phrase is connected with the Lord of the Rings in the AI.
Right.
It has to be.
Yeah, it goes out across the internet.
There's no way for it to generate this kind of thing.
It looks at other images that are associated with that phrase, and this is what it's found.
Yeah, right.
So. All right. So now we go into something these phrases are less connected with the Lord of the Rings, but still interesting. And they're memorable. You'd recognize them once I tell you what they are if you can't figure it out. So this is the next one. Right here. I don't want to describe because I don't want to give it away to you. Maybe one of you wants to describe it.
Yeah, there's some.
It's a highway.
Looks like there's a highway, and there's some hills, and kind of a sunset or a sunrise, or
And it's a unique. What did you say? I don't know what style this is. This is very like 60s, 50s almost art.
Right.
It's a little pop art ish.
Right. It does have that sort of pop art from the 50s. Yeah.
But I didn't tell it that. It just decided that on its own.
Okay. You got this, Dan. I think I know what it is, but
my guess would be the road goes ever on and on.
Perfect. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. I didn't change anything. That's a phrase I put in. It just came up with this.
I'm a Calvinist, so I think like a robot.
Oh, that's excellent.
Oh man. All right. Okay. Next one. You guys are good. All right. Here we go. This is also from The Lord of the Rings. Michael, do you want to describe this one then?
We have rolling green hills in the foreground, rolling on into a watercolor type background, which is a silhouette of mountains. And it's very watercolory feel with clouds and mist over the hills.
I don't know if you can see, but I think like right here, right in the middle, right there, that's almost like they put a deer there. It was like that little thing.
Whoa, you're right. Yeah. Something is definitely there.
Random.
I didn't tell it to put a deer there.
Huh.
No, it comes up with weird things sometimes.
So is this something to do with the journey to the Misty Mountains?
No, it doesn't.
It's in the Lord of the Rings. It's not.
It's in the Lord of the Rings.
Oh! Is this the green lands to a far sunrise?
Yeah, very good.
From
okay.
Gandalf.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's said twice, I think, in Lord of the Rings. I know Gandalf says it.
Swift green.
A far green country under a swift sunrise.
Under a swift sunrise. There we go. Thank you.
And this is what came up with. I'm like, wow, that is very beautiful. It is a far green country, and there's the sun rising in the background with some mountains, and it did a great job.
It's really interesting that we're doing this because without any priors, we had a friend of one of my daughters stay with us for a few days in the last week. She's an artist, does her own art, and I brought up to her the question about AI art now. What's her take on it? So we had a really interesting discussion about that. And my question in my provocative style was, if, without any insult intended, if the AI art gets better and better, which it no doubt will, because we sink so much time and resources into bettering our technology nowadays, and AI can consistently come up with beautiful images. Why do we need artists anymore?
I tell you, right now the AI art is really wonky, though.
I know it is. But it won't be that way forever.
Yeah, well, there's still something missing. Like here's the problem, though, is because, well, now we're getting super philosophical, but because art has become meaningless in the study of it, especially in the 20th century, AI art can be just as good as anything else, since there is no definitive notion of excellence anymore in art. Like, it can be anything. And so you're seeing some of this stuff, and you're like, wow, this is way better than anything I've ever seen come from, Dadaism or Jackson Pollock or any of those guys, because it truly is far more interesting. I mean, that picture of the two guys, give me the meat and give it to me raw. I was like it looks so weird, but it's like it would be something that somebody probably could have drawn at some point, and you'd been like, well, what is the meaning of that burnt look on his chest? And like, we can read into that.
So the way I describe AI art now is that it has a visual stream of consciousness feel to it. So there's a way when you have a stream of consciousness dialogue or piece in literature, where it's just these sort of dreamlike random thoughts that pop in that don't and elements in it, where there's a generally compelling image but then oddities to it. And that's the way I think of it now. But I agree. But I think it's going to get better.
It does a great job with landscapes right now. If you tell it, like, you can give it some great commands, and you can tell it like to be photorealistic and to render things out, and as almost like an inspiration for certain things. Like, if you're trying to get inspired to do something, it's not a bad idea sometimes to just put a phrase in there and just see what it comes up with and go with it. It's still just ultimately, I don't think it can never replace real art, because I believe that there's more than just reference and analytic data within what's created by art. They're like by a person. I think there's more to it. Like, I don't know. We'll see. Okay, but this is a whole nother podcast we have to start, apparently. Yeah. So let's move on. To the that's number 4. We have 2 more. All right. So this is that's number 3. This is the 4th one. This one's pretty cool. And I'll tell you, it's a picture of a kid. It looks like a staircase moving up into a spiral of a clock. And there's something on the ground. Looks like a folded piece of paper next to him. Any ideas? This one's a little harder.
Is this from the scene of Sam going up the stairs of Cirith Ungol?
No. It is a phrase. I'll give you another hint. It is a phrase spoken by Gandalf.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Dan. If you got it, I'm gonna.
And the clock is a big giveaway.
Yeah, it has something to do with time. Does Gandalf say something about like so to all who live to see such times? Or something like that?
It was close. Yeah, it's right before that. It says, "All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us."
Technically, it's right after. Yeah, it's the following phrase. It says, "So do all."
All we have to do is decide. So I have a question about AI art, because it seems like it's just been recent that this is like a new phenomenon, that like all of a sudden there's just AI art generating programs everywhere. I guess these programs have been working on these for a while, I guess. I just started seeing it like a few weeks ago.
They've been around for only recently have you been able to do it yourself. Like, it's
exactly. The apps are about a year to 2 years old at the oldest. For public use, but yes, they've been working on it for a long time. But I think they've got to the stage where they're starting to think about commercializing it. Different companies, so they're building apps with that.
Yeah, and I'm using it not just for fun like this, but I also use it for sometimes screenshots and things like that, and it's gotten really good. And so what is when you generate it, there's no copyright to it, because now the Midjourney can use it. Who I use it, the company, the system that I use, they have access to it, and I have access to it, but I can't. Like, I can even put it on a T-shirt and make money from it if I really wanted to. But there's no license that I have to pay. There's no royalty fee. So that's a nice thing about it. Okay, so next one. This here might be a little bit harder. This is a picture of a person, a woman, I guess, looking off. It looks like she's at the top of a cave, looking away, and there's a silhouette of brightness in front of her. I don't know how to describe this. And there are 2 things standing to her left on the stairs. 2 figures of a sort. This one's hard.
I don't know this one. This is
Yeah, this one I knew would be hard because it had a hard time figuring out what to do with it, and I ran it a few times to try and get something that would be appropriately more interesting, because the others were just even worse.
I would guess that this is Galadriel and the looking.
It is not Galadriel. It's another female from The Return of the King. This happens in Return of the King.
is it Éowyn looking over the battlements of Minas Tirith?
Closer. It is Éowyn, but it's not looking over the battlements of Minas Tirith. It's a phrase she says. Her most famous phrase.
You mean besides, "I am no man"?
There you go. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman.
What? That's
That's what it generated.
Oh, the whole one. No living man am I. You look upon a woman.
Yeah.
So they have the no living men off to the left in those figures. I guess.
That's kind of crazy. I don't know.
Wraith-like things.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And like a big giant mosquito floating right there, I guess.
Or butterfly mosquito thing.
All right. Last one.
This is very funny.
This is maybe the coolest one. Let's see if you guys get this one.
Wow.
How do you describe this one?
There's a beam of light coming down from the heavens into a narrow canyon. And in the foreground closer to us, there look like posts, a variety of posts in the canyon, with a tether or a rope across one of them.
Right.
And it's up against the wall. So the whole thing is up against the wall of this canyon.
Yeah. This one was very unique. I have no idea how it generated this from the phrase that I got it. Like I kind of do. Should I give you a hint?
Is it the Sam quote about far light and far?
Nope, not the Sam quote.
I'm going to guess you just typed in Paths of the Dead.
No, not Paths of the Dead.
Okay.
This it happens in Fellowship of the Ring, both in the film and in the books. It happens before they get to Lorien.
I mean, this isn't the doors of Moria, is it?
It's not the doors of Moria. It does happen in Moria. It's a phrase.
Fly, you fools.
You're awfully close. If I were playing hot and cold with my kids, I'd say really hot.
So you shall not pass.
There it is.
Hey.
You shall not pass. All right. Yeah. This is what it came up with. You shall not pass.
How weird. I mean, I guess it's like you're walking in a direction, but then there's no way to pass this point. But where did the light come from?
I have no idea. I only thing I can think of is maybe the Balrog's whip, right? And somehow it the light of Gandalf's staff, and when they fight, and there are pictures that it's on the internet from the film of the two of them fighting and saying, "You shall not pass."
Yeah, I guess that's right.
It's the only thing I can think of. But then the funny thing is those two posts with a rope, like walking off the light. That was like, I guess you're not going to pass this place.
Right.
It's kind of funny though.
It'd be like something you find on some sort of public trail where they've closed the trail off, and it's like there's this rope saying, "Don't go any further."
Yeah, but it shows like when you say "you shall not pass," you say that to somebody. You're like, "Oh, I understand that you mean I'm not going to pass this point. It has something to do with barring my way to get somewhere."
Right.
So
Very
if you had
cool.
somebody to draw that, they probably wouldn't come up with this. They would actually understand what "you shall not pass" means, just in the same way we've said, "But no living man am I, you look upon a woman." I'd be like, well, I don't know if I'd have a woman standing at the top of the stairs with two blackened silhouettes of dead guys next to her to the left or something like that. Anyway.
It's very literal.
Very literal. Very literal. And it did, for some reason, because it's copying something directly, apparently. It threw in a fake little artist's signature in the bottom right. I don't know why. Just did.
Wow.
So
that's weird. Oh, so that was just generated by it.
That was just generated by it. Yeah. But it's not actually words. Like it does this sometimes where it actually will go in and I'm trying to zoom in.
Well, I am
here.
no artist, so my AI artist brain is not very good at this stuff. Like what visual?
You guys got
images?
most of them.
Yeah. Maybe the AI is becoming sentient, and that's its name.
Well, that's no doubt what people are going to claim, but I'm afraid that all we really have here is a bunch. It's a rehash, and this came out in the discussion that I had with the artist that stayed with us. Is there's a couple elements to true art. I agree with you, Jonathan, that in our current age we don't know what art is, and so people think art is anything subjective that they feel like putting their time to. Or showing it as art, calling art, and it makes you feel something. But that's not the ancient and long treasured definition across cultures, which has something more to do with the imitation of nature, where an artist takes things in nature, takes pieces out, puts them together, and then adds visual subcreation to that. So they're part of art is always sort of reflective of and borrowed from creation, from the world around us, and part of art is our own modification of that. Mm-hmm. All AI art will ever be is a replica of the first part of that definition. Even at its best, all it will ever be is human, a mishmash of other human images and that are related to the concept, those words,
until it becomes sentient, like Dan said, it already is.
Right. Well, then it takes over the world, and there's no more humans, so we don't. Who cares at that point?
So who cares about art? Yeah. Well, I mostly agree with that definition, but I don't think we should get into it right now.
Wait, that's not what we're about?
No, that's not what we're about.
We're 20 minutes in and we haven't said a single word about the Silmarillion.
I hope you guys enjoyed that, because that was a super huge detour into a world of nihilism, but quite fun nihilism, because does AI art actually mean anything, or is it just nihilist? Anyway, okay.
Can I break down our chapter, the second half of our chapter?
How about, before you do that?
Oh, right. Sorry.
We have to get into
Dan's Big Thought.
Thanks for that intro, Jonathan.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to help.
That's what he's here for.
So my big thought, if I could sum it up, this part of this chapter, you kind of have two things. You have Doomsday preppers and you have dragon. So
I like it.
You have two elves that fall asleep by the water. It's Turgon and Finrod. And apparently Olmo has no problem communicating or talking to them. He gives them like troubled dreams. And they wake up and they go, oh man, things are going to go bad. I got to get ready. I got to go buy my bunker. I got to get a ham radio. I got to get canned goods and Twinkies and radiation tablets and guns and ammo. I got to get ready because the apocalypse is coming. I got to bury all my gold. So they just wake up and they're like, man, and they don't talk to each other about this, but they just both realize like impending doom is coming. I have to go get ready. And so then Tolkien kind of relays how they go off and they found these cities. I think one of them is called Nagrathond. Does that sound right?
Nargothrond.
Nargothrond.
Nargothrond? Yeah.
Nargothrond. And
Nargothrond, yes.
There's these caverns that his buddy Thingol shows them where they are. And then Turgon establishes, I think it's called Tumladen. Does that sound right?
Well, he hasn't
actually named the city, right?
Right, he hasn't named the city yet, but he does find a region where he's going to build the city, and Tumladen is that region.
Okay, got it. So he hasn't built the city yet, but he's found a location. So you have these Doomsday preppers that are like, I have to go build a fortress or a stronghold somewhere, and they go off and start looking into how to do that. And then at the end of the book, at the end of this chapter, you actually have a big giant fire drake come out, and you have some battles with elves and orcs, and so it's pretty cool. I guess Olmo was right that, hey, you guys need to get ready because Morgoth has more things in store for you than you guys realize.
I like that. It's funny that you the way that you phrased it.
I like it.
I think we're done. I think that's the whole chapter. So no, I'm joking. I don't know. Michael, do you want to also bring us into more of it? Because I think that's a great start where the whole it is Turgon and Finrod that set this up, whereas
yes,
the real Finrod, not the Finrod we were introduced to.
Right. So a couple things to say. Well, let's talk about that in a second. But real quick, let me give the pillars of what Tolkien's doing in this chapter. I agree with you 100%, Dan. What the Doomsday prepping, that's the center. It's the biggest foreshadowing. It's the most important part of the chapter, aside from the historic, just like this battle happened and that battle happened. So basically, what happens is 20 years after the sun rises and all the things that we covered in our previous episode happens, there's a big party. So first there's a party 20 years after the sunrise, and Fingolfin holds it. So he's the new High King of the Noldor because the sons of Fëanor have ceded to him the right to rule the Noldor. It should have technically fallen to them, but they give up their right to him. So he holds a party. Most of the elves show up. That's the green elves, the gray elves, a couple of the sons of Fëanor and all of Fingolfin's folks. So you got Noldor, Sindar, and Sylvan or Green Elves. And then after that, you have 30 years later, you have the Doomsday Dreams that Dan mentioned. And then an indeterminate time later, while the Doomsday Dreams are being played out and they're prepping, they're doing their Doomsday prep, then Morgoth tries to thinks, well, maybe they've gone soft, and he starts with fires and volcanic explosions and earthquakes, and then sends his orcs pouring across, but the elves just trounce him in what's called the Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle. And Morgoth's like, well, that didn't work, so let's wait 100 years. So he waits 100 years, and then he tries to encircle Fingolfin and come down from the grinding ice with an army of orcs. The elves see him, and because unlike the elves of Rings of Power, they can actually see things coming from a distance, and so they destroy them. And then he's like, well, that didn't work. Let's wait another 100 years. Now, he didn't actually want to attack, apparently, after another 100 years, but he's been creating dragons. So the first dragon, Glaurung, who does not have wings, but he's a fire drake, comes out and does a lot of damage, but then he's driven back with elven horse archers led by the real... is it Finrod or Fingon? No, it's Fingon. It's not Finrod. So... by Fingon, and then Morgoth is pissed because he wanted to wait until Glaurung was old, but now the Spry's bit, and so the elves actually create the siege of Angband. So they instead of giving that whole plain to the south of Angband the distance, just leaving it alone and waiting for Morgoth to issue forth, they actually encircle everything they can. They can't breach the fortress of Morgoth, but they can lay siege to it. And so they do, and there's 200 years of peace. So we have a roughly 500-year cycle in this last half of the chapter that it covers. Definitely the most important thing in the chapter is what Dan mentioned, which is the foreshadowing about the doom to come and Ulmo taking a direct hand and warning two of the elves about it. So,
well, so in all that, that's. What stood out to you in this chapter outside of, that they're preparing for everything? I guess what it stood out to me is that it lays out the major fortresses, the major... that's a good way of putting it. It's the chessboard is now being set out. So you've got the major royal areas. I'm trying to think of this. My mind is broken. It's the end of the day. I'm so sorry. So you've got Thingol in Menegroth, right? You've got that one big area. You've got Nargothrond. You've got that's being built, and then eventually you will have Gondolin, which is where Turgon is, and these three major fortresses, these strongholds, are. Have their major roles to play in the upcoming stories, and you only know that because I've read through it a number of times in the future. But to see it all played out here, I kind of forgot that this is the point at which now they lay it all out. Now we're ready to go. We're ready to move forward, and then we also see Glaurung for the first time. It's kind of like, hey, yeah, there's dragon. They don't tell us any wings, but he comes into play later in a much greater story. My favorite story of the whole Silmarillion. That's what stood out to me in this chapter.
Your favorite.
Yeah, it is. More so than Beren and Luthien, I know. I'm sorry.
Wow. All right.
But what stood out to you as the most, Dan had his big thought, and there is the friendship between Finrod and Turgon, essentially, the lords of Nargothrond and what will be Gondolin, these major strongholds. But what stood out to you? Yeah.
So a few details stood out to me. First of all, Tolkien is really concerned with, so it's really interesting. It's unlike anything Hollywood would do. The power of the Noldor is overwhelming here. So these are just one of the elven races from Valinor. And they're shown time and again to be superior to to all the armies of Morgoth. Now, Morgoth himself doesn't leave his fortress, so he's not going to engage except one last time in battle. Or I guess two last times, but he doesn't come forth here. He doesn't send his Balrogs, so they don't have to deal with that. So all these armies of orcs, and then even the young dragon, the Noldor handle. So it seems like you got 400 years of this. That's a long time. Not for elves, but it's a long time in general. It's 400 years. And you have this situation where Tolkien is setting us up for the next tragedy. The dreams that come are all about how the good times never last. And that's what one of the things, aside from the fact you can always count on someone singing something in Tolkien, and he didn't let us down at the very end of the last sentence of this chapter. The Grey Elves are singing, so someone always sings. But besides that, the good and the beautiful are real in Tolkien's world, but they are always passing away. And so we're being set up for the tragedy to come.
So, but they're not building something brand new. They're not creating Moria. They're not creating Menegroth. They're not building the city upon a hill. They're just going with what they know already instead of creating something new. I don't know what that says about them, other than they miss what they had still. Maybe that's a part of it. You could say.
Well, that's really interesting. Just riffing on that for a second, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So Nargothrond is based directly on Menegroth. Menegroth was told to us as the greatest of these subterranean and palaces and places that the world will ever see. Basically, it's this unbelievable underground fortress and realm, which is just stunning. And Nargothrond,
it would put Moria to shame.
It would put Moria to shame easily, and Moria at its height. And so Nargothrond is just a pale imitation. And then you have Turgon, who goes and does a pale imitation of Tirion, the city of Tirion. Now, it's still going to be a great city because it's the greatest that Middle-earth will have seen up to this point, which is in Gondolin. But doesn't that just reinforce what's always going on in Tolkien, which is what came before is always the best and the highest, and then things that come after are reflections and they're not as good, and reflections and not as good, and then we're going to have the works of. So now we have the works of the Noldor, which are just reflections of the higher works of the Valar, or the works of the Maiar in the case of Melian and the dwarves and Thingol. And then after the Noldor is going to come the Min, and the Min of Numenor, and what they have will be great, but not as great as what came before. And then you're going to have the Min of the later years. And so and then the dwarves, Moria itself is a reflection of Nargothrond and Menegroth. So yeah, I think it's those echoings, the sort of diminishing echoes over the ages for Tolkien, where everything beautiful and good diminishes and is echoed down through time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't thought of it in that way. I like that you bring that up again, because I'd forgotten that. And if you go back to one of our earlier episodes, I can't remember. It probably has to do with Fëanor, when we talk about how even the hobbits, the best swords that they got, the best weaponry was the elven weaponry that they had received from the trolls, the troll horde.
Yeah, Orcrist and Glamdring, in the book The Hobbit, were from Gondolin, and so they were the best things that were around. But that we find in this chapter that Gondolin is just it isn't called Gondolin yet, but it's going to be Gondolin. Is itself just a reflection of what's in Tirion in the land of the Valar. So anyway, it's a reminder, as Tolkien always does. There was another detail that I wanted to talk about, but Dan, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm wondering what that says about Tolkien, just in general, that he thinks that the greater things came before. I'm like, where he's coming from in terms of, like, is he making a statement about us, where we find ourselves? Because, like, clearly he didn't have cell phones. He didn't know about all the cool stuff that we have now, like, social media like Twitter. I mean, we're doing
the height of human civilization, right? And communication.
He'd be mightily impressed by Twitter. Yeah.
Do you think he would look at our modern civilization that's progressed since 1970, whatever, and go like, yeah, things are getting worse? Like,
yes.
Would he say that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he hated the encroachment of all technology into the countryside, right? He hated that. He was a monarchist as well. Like a benevolent monarchy would be the best kind of ruling government. So yeah, I don't think he would have any love for the world that we live in now.
Right. Well, and that's an ancient tradition. So Socrates thought so too, that there should be that the king was the high. The Middle Ages were full of that. But even so, like the idea of a benevolent monarch, he holds it up as an ideal, but he also, whenever we see a monarch, we see their failings, and he's very clear at showing us that even the great monarchs are not perfect. So he has this continual shade over his world where there is a kind of diminishment and darkness and entropy that's happening continually. He's very aware of that cycle of the world. I think there's a sadness in the way he portrays Middle-earth in that regard. And I guess to go even deeper than that, I would suspect, and this would be a much larger discussion, but I would suspect that there's something of his Christian mythos in this too, because what comes first, the created being, the children of Iluvatar were best when they were young, and then over time, they, just like Adam and Eve, over time they diminish, and they're in their mistakes and tragedies and sin, the world gets darker. And so I think that's kind of one of his enduring themes down through the ages. But he nevertheless insists upon beauty and goodness. It doesn't do for him what it does for some of the nihilists and the skeptics of our modern age, where the continual degradation of accomplishment and goodness makes some people despair. For Tolkien, it didn't make him despair. But he didn't look away from it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, hey, things are getting worse and worse. That's the reality. Therefore, hang on to what's good and what's true and what's beautiful, as opposed to things are getting worse and worse, so just give up and just embrace the entropy or whatever.
Stick your head in the sand until the wave of an entropy washes over.
Or what's the phrase? The arrow of history always points toward the good, or something
like that.
The
arc of history always bends towards justice.
Yeah, which there's a lot of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, as Christians, in the ultimate sense, I think that's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in the immediate history of any given time, that isn't necessarily true.
Right.
And so yeah, there's something very deep in the way he portrays his world. So the detail I wanted to talk about was Galadriel and Finrod. So we've seen much of Galadriel and Finrod, or in the travesty of the Rings of Power. What I found fascinating about the second half of the chapter is it tells us a good deal, not just what Dan mentioned about Finrod and his dream, followed by the fashioning of Nargothrond, this underground haven for the elves. But also that we learned something about Galadriel well before the War of Wrath in all this, which is we learn that she, she's sister to Finrod, but she comes when Finrod goes to Thingol and Melian in their forest of Doriath, and Finrod learns from Thingol about the existence of these potential caves that could turn into his haven that he has in mind. Galadriel stays in Doriath. She does not go with Finrod after that, because she falls in love with Celeborn. She meets Celeborn, she falls in love with him, and then she stays long. It says here, Galadriel, his sister, went not with him to Nargothrond, for in Doriath dwelt Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol, and there was great love between them. Therefore she remained in the hidden kingdom and abode with Melian. Remember, Melian is the only embodied Maiar on Middle-earth right now, in the lands of Middle-earth. Sorry, the only good embodied Maiar. Sauron, I guess, is an embodied Maiar. He's in Angband, but and the Sword of the Balrogs. All right. Sorry, I need to finish with that. Therefore, she remained in the hidden kingdom and abode with Melian, and of her, that's of Melian, learned great lore and wisdom concerning Middle-earth. So what's fascinating to me, to contrast it with the travesty that we recently watched with Rings of Power, is that we see here a change in Galadriel's character. What do we know about Galadriel? We don't know very much before this, but we remember maybe back when she decides to come to Middle-earth, she doesn't take the vows of the sons of Fëanor, but she does go with them to Middle-earth. Why? Because she desires to rule a realm for herself. So there's a kind of low purpose to that, right? She desires a land and ruling on her own. It's not perhaps the lowest of all inclinations, but it's not a high and virtuous thing, one would say. But now she in fact changes in this passage. She stays long with the one Maiar of good Maiar in Middle Earth, and she for a long time, and she learns great lore and wisdom. So this is Galadriel's arc. She actually becomes different here, which is fascinating to me, because the whole purpose told by the Rings of Power showrunners is that they wanted to show apparently a 13-year-old Galadriel, who nevertheless is thousands of years old, but that they wanted her to have an arc where she becomes the Galadriel that eventually, I guess, and over the 5 seasons that we come to know. But that's not how it happens. Galadriel is already that way by the time of the Second Age. So anyway,
so what you're saying is she doesn't change because she fell in love with Sauron and then he betrayed her. Is that what you're saying? Because I thought that
they're very faithful to Tolkien. And you know how faithful they are?
Yeah, I am sure glad we're going through the Silmarillion, and even these little bits, but they didn't have the license to this. What can you say? They only had.
So yeah, it's fair, Jonathan. They didn't have the license. But if I was what if we were making Rings of Power? What if we had gotten the rights? Right?
Yeah.
What would you do?
No, I know. Well, you would know.
If you gotten the rights, if you were working for Amazon, they hired us. Let's say they hired these 3, all of us jokers. So sure, I mean, I joke, dad jokes mostly, but yeah. If we had been working for Amazon and had been charged with laying out the structure of what kind of work it was to be, and we were told, hey, look, we don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, so you can't make anything happen specifically that happens in the Silmarillion, or we're going to get creamed legally. So, but what would you do? I know what I would do, but I'll ask you guys. What would you do?
Well, I think the problem is
how would you portray Galadriel?
Well, no. This is the same problem I had with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, is that when you change the character, it changes the story. And so I would stick with the character, because if you can at least hew closely to the character and the way that it was originally written, your story should follow suit, and you would believe that the character is the character. Even if it's a new story you made up, you will have the character that was established already, and that's what they did not do. So I would go back and I would look through how Tolkien talked about Galadriel and go through all those quotes, and I would say Galadriel is not some, like you said, a petty 13-year-old who gets all emotional and tries to then manipulate people into doing the horrible things that she wants them to do. She actually learned wisdom, and she went through many different trials, and she had a husband and a daughter and these kinds of things at that point in time. So,
right,
I'd get the character right first.
Yeah, exactly, because you can portray, without breaking copyright, you can portray a Galadriel that has, since her time arriving in Middle Earth, has changed.
Yeah,
you can portray that, and I can't remember what, if anything, from the appendices refers to this time frame in the First Age. I don't think much of the appendices refers to these kind of details in the First Age.
I think it was a mistake to make. Go ahead, Dan.
We've had this conversation before, but yeah, even if you can't get all the details right in making an adaptation, you can be true to the spirit of what.
That's
like
right.
You were saying, get the character right. Don't change the characters, because they made these changes and they're all awful, and they're all and the character arcs that they weave in the show, it's almost like schizophrenic. It's like, I have no idea why this character would choose to do this in this situation, because you haven't established that the character would do that. It's very weird.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, the mistake they made, which they had all this stuff from even this chapter here in the Silmarillion. They had this information about the characters, and they decided that they would make Galadriel their main character, and that was the mistake, because if you make a main character, they have to have some sort of character arc, and if the arc is so wide that you can't see it happening, that's a problem. They should have made probably Muriel the main character, and all the trials that she goes through, because we don't know a lot about them, but we know she was forced to marry somebody, and she worked with the faithful in order to essentially help them survive. So they could have had a character with an arc that started off perhaps, on the wrong side of history there, and then moved her into that. They could have done something like that. They didn't, because they had to have fan service and put Galadriel in there. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Start with the characters. Make sure the characters don't change. I agree with that. That's good.
Yeah. The other things in this chapter, though, one thing that stuck out to me was that one little teasing line of Finrod Felagund was not the first to dwell in the caves beside the river Nerog, which
dun,
isn't,
dun, dun.
yeah, which is, it doesn't become a major story later, but it does have there's a certain character later that is a part of who dwelt in those caves or who knew what Finrod had done. So I like that part. I mean, I'd never noticed that before in reading this here, that it actually refers to essentially the story of the children of Húrin, which is my favorite story in the Silmarillion. So there's that. And it brings up the Latin Nauglamir, which is also a big part of it, which is the necklace of the dwarves, which becomes a major issue later too. But so it's again, this is one of those chapters that sets the table, that puts all those pieces out on the chessboard, like you were saying, Dan, and really moves it forward so that we can get into those stories next to now that we know where everybody is, now that we know there's a dragon out there and that Sauron is, or Morgoth is still creating armies and biding his time. And so the biding peace is not going to last, neither between Sauron and the elves and the dwarves, but the elves themselves and the sons of Fëanor. And
that's right.
And all those
things are only getting worse from here. But first, to continue our chessboard analogy, the next chapter is going to be all about what color the squares are on a chessboard.
That's a great thing. Yeah, I was looking at it, I'm like, oh yeah, this chapter. I remember reading this the first time. I was really confused after these last two chapters because there's so much in so many places. I feel like if I had a huge budget, I would go out and hire somebody to go out and like create this beautiful interactive video of where everything is and who's moving where and what's where and how's what.
I mean, this is just fancy. Like Tolkien just loves maps, and he loves, so this is a whole chapter devoted just to the map and what the realms look like.
Yeah. So that is the
geography
chapter that we'll do next week. Any final thoughts on chapter 13?
That's all I got.
All right. Yeah. Dan?
I do think it's interesting that Morgoth has the ability to create dragons. Like, it doesn't really specify like where they come from, or because I know we've read before about how he has made orcs by corrupting the elves that already existed. So I like how there's a little bit of mystery still, like where do these fire drakes come from? It says Glaurung is the first of the fire drakes, but it's just fascinating to me that he has this ability to create this massive beast of a monster that, like, it takes an entire army of elves to fight. It's just like he has his master secret plan of like, all right, I'm going to get a bunch of dragons and that's how I'm going to win. And then one of the dragons goes off and starts fighting up too early, and
too soon.
I love that detail that the dragon just goes out to fight and it's not ready yet.
Yeah, and it still doesn't even get killed. They just drive it off. No, that's a good point, Dan, and brings up. So we recently, as is my wont, I've been reading Lord of the Rings to my kids. We recently read Fangorn, and in Fangorn, Treebeard tells the hobbits that the trolls that they've met were made in mockery of the Ents. So Morgoth always creates in mockery of or by twisting something good. With the dragons, I've had that thought before, and the only since the first model, since the 1.0 dragon, or 0.1 dragon, I guess, because this is the untested beta model. It wasn't even ready for prime time. So the 0.1 version of Glaurung that we see today, which will later become the 1.0 version of Glaurung later on, does not have wings. So the first thought would be, fly, an eagle maybe. He took an eagle and twisted it or something. But that's clearly not where dragons come from. The only thing that I can think is the monsters that existed prior to all the children of Iluvatar. So we're told, remember, that Orome has his wild hunt that comes and scours the land from time to time, slaying all the great monsters that they find. So there might have been monsters that Morgoth then used to sort of breed dragons, and sort of like the way we took wolves and turned them into different versions of dogs. He might have taken the base version of some monster and then some worm of some kind and then turned it into dragons.
I think that makes sense. I hadn't really thought about it that deeply. That's why I have you guys here. Yeah, I'm looking for that quote from Orome about the dragons here. Is this it?
About dragons?
About here it is.
Monsters.
This is in which chapter is this?
So chapter 1.
Yeah, it's chapter 1.
Chapter 2. Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Tolkien writes that And Orome, tamer of beasts, would ride too at whiles in the darkness of the unlit forests. As a mighty hunter, he came with spear and bow, pursuing to the death the monsters and fell creatures of the kingdom of Melkor, and his white horse Nahar shone like silver in the shadows. So right there you could say, yeah, it's those monsters and fell creatures. And I'm sure that Morgoth has been doing what he could in order to accelerate their growth and amplify their monstrousness. But yeah.
Yeah, and when he discovers the elves, because remember, he's the Valar that discovers the elves, it says, in the coming of the elves, it says, and on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastward in his hunting. That's the hunting that you just referenced. And he turned north by the shores of Helkar and passed into the shadows of Oro and Carni, the mountains of the east. And then Nahar, his horse, starts neighing, because technically Nahar discovers the elves. So the horse, it's the horse that's responsible for it.
Oh, man.
That's chapter 3.
I don't accept that, Michael. I'm sorry. We're not disagreeing whether it's the horse. Because who's guiding the horse? Behind every good horse, there's an elf turning its head. Right. So, all right. So we'll move on to chapter 14 of Beleriand and its realms. We'll do the whole chapter next week. And we'll get into geography.
Geography, everyone's favorite.
It'll be fun. So we'll do that next week before we close. And before we move on to that one, I want to remind you, if you get a chance, give us a review on iTunes and Google and wherever else you listen. Sorry, iTunes, do they call it that anymore? Apple Podcasts. Been around too long. So yeah, 5-star review would be great. We'd love to get more folks listening to us and involved in the conversation. Because we do look at comments in YouTube, and we do have a great discussion in our YouTube. Sorry, not on our YouTube. In our Discord chats, which is with our patrons. So you can go to theonewing.com/patron and get information there about what it takes in order to join us and to get the extended podcast, which will be coming up after we go through. What are we doing? This is,
If You Like Tolkien.
So Dan, today it's your chance to tell us
today
about.
I am bringing in the Lord of the Rings board game by Reiner Knizia. Nice. This is one of the classic. This is before like co-op games were big. So nowadays you can go to Target and get Pandemic, and they have like 20 different versions of Pandemic. This is back in the days when co-op games were just not widely available. This is I think it's 2 to 5 players. It's by one of the best board game designers of all time, Reiner Knizia. And you basically are cooperating together as hobbits. And I'm trying to see if I can show you guys.
Yeah, I'm zoomed in. Yeah, it looks good.
So yeah, you've got like a progress board that you're trying to like cooperate. You have a hand of cards that you have to manage, and you're all cooperating together to lay down these cards. It's pretty simple. It's abstract a little bit. You're trying to cooperate and meet the board challenges. Like you're trying to progress on these different tracks. And as you do so, you have to make decisions. Like if I do this, my character might get more and more corrupted, or it might bring Sauron's pawn closer and closer to the track. If Sauron ever catches the hobbit who has the ring, I think the game is over.
Okay.
If you ever become corrupted too much, your personal character might be out of the game. So you're constantly making decisions, and it's very thematic to Tolkien. At least the story of Lord of the Rings, it's very thematic because you're all cooperating together, and you're coordinating your cards to try to achieve the objective of destroying the ring. And you have these opportunities of like, I can sacrifice my character to push you over the goal line. You really get that sense of like, we just got to get Frodo to Mordor. You really get that sense in this game. It's really fun.
Lord of the Rings. That's an old one. I'm trying to find if it's actually you can buy it anymore. You might have to go to eBay.
Yeah, this printing was from Hasbro back in like the 90s or maybe the early 2000s, or around when the movie came out.
Okay.
And I think Fantasy Flight did a reprint of it recently, maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. But I think that is also out of print. But I just did a quick Google search, and you can find this on eBay for $20-$30 if you really want to give it a try. I know they came out with a bunch of expansion boards and stuff to it. Like on this one, you have 2 double-sided boards where you go through like Helm's Deep and Mordor, Shelob's Lair, Moria. But and they have like expansion boards where they have other boards you can do. They have other mechanisms you can introduce, but really just the base game. That's all you need.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun.
Whenever we meet up, you'll have to bring that, and we can live stream us playing.
Yes.
That would be fun.
It's very fun.
Sweet. Wow, thanks. I've never actually played it. I think I had a copy of it, or I had a friend who had a copy of it, and we never sat down to play it. I ended up playing, I think, Star Wars Risk, which was actually a lot of fun too. But
that's cool.
I need to jump into that. Well, thanks, Dan.
It's a good one.
Cool.
It's been many years since I played it. We should definitely get an excuse to play.
It's definitely out of print. I can't find it anywhere except eBay and other secondhand places. So give that a shot. I'll see if I can find any. Throw some in the links below and in the show notes. So thanks, Dan. We're on to chapter 14 next week of Beleriand and its Realms. We'll do the whole thing. And then for those of you who aren't our patrons, I'm sorry, you can go away now. We are moving on to our patron-only extended podcast where we get to answer the deep questions of the day and go into some more details. So yeah, join us at thewandering.com/patron if you want to get that. Each episode is about another 20 to 30 minutes long. And you just get it in your podcast player without a problem. You just need to log in to the site with your patron account, which is $4 a month, and the first month is free. So give that a shot. We'd appreciate it. And we hope to see you there in our Discord chat too. So we'll see you next time in chapter 14.
Bye.
Bye.